So René Girard argues that we have what he calls mimetic desire. We don't have true desire ourselves. Mimetic means we copy. We copy the desires of others and adopt it as our own. And we don't know that that's happening. And you see a lot of this, bubbles in financial markets. Why are there bubbles? Well, it's because there's momentum. Why is there momentum? Well, a lot of times it's because everybody's going for it. As we grow, our heroes evolve and change. And I think we need to be really deliberate around who are the heroes that I'm looking at to triangulate, what's valuable in life.
John Carbrey is the founder and managing director of FutureSight, a leading venture studio based out of San Francisco. Today, through FutureSight, he works with values-driven entrepreneurs to build AI-driven technology companies that could create a better and more moral future for the world. John, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, delighted to be here with you.
You've exited companies in millions of dollars of value. I think I've read on your website, even when I was doing my research, there's like Intrafinity, Civic Life, Telenova, and SharpSchool. I think in Singapore, most people are not familiar with these names because maybe it doesn't encroach on our geography.
Sure.
But could you help me understand back then when you first started your entrepreneurial journey, what were kind of the problems you're looking to solve?
I started my first small ventures in high school. And you could think of me as your prototypical computer nerd. I love programming. I loved writing software products, maybe not even products, just small software applications. I like programming languages. So I was really kind of nerdy in that sense. The first website I made was a programming website to teach people how to program C++, which is kind of a low-level programming language. So I didn't really start out saying, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to go make a lot of money. I was more delighted in like the beauty of like a well-architected system from a software perspective and the latest technology that was coming out. And so, but I was very lucky. I had a great initial co-op term, like a internship in a company, and started to get some experience. Spent some time in Boston at an MIT startup at the end of my high school, and in my second year in university, I was in my dorm room coding some software, and I got a phone call, and someone said, "Hey, I'd like to fly up to Toronto to meet you and your management team and all your software developers, and I'd like to use your software for our 10,000 employees." And I had the phone, and I didn't really know what to do with that. The prior time, I'd sold software for maybe $2,000, and they were going to pay $250,000 for what they wanted to buy from me. And so I said, "Let me call you back." And but eventually, they came and eventually decided to go ahead. And so that suddenly, in second year at University of Toronto, I had to call my dad, and I said, "Dad, I know you had this idea for me finishing university, but what do you think we should do here?" And it's rare for a father to do this, but he said to me, "John, go for it. You can always go back to university." So I kind of put university on hold and was kind of thrust through that experience into an entrepreneurial journey. Yeah.
When you started a software company, back then, you had this offer of maybe $250,000. You got the call. You want to start the company. What were like the first 5 things you kind of thought you needed to do?
Well, it's an interesting story. I called a mentor of mine who was my high school computers teacher. And he was a mentor. He taught me software development. And I said, "I don't know what to do with this." And then he said, "Well, let me help you." And so it's a bit of a crazy story, but we were able to kind of set up an office, and he was able to kind of join and get involved with the company, and we built something amazing together.
I assume this was Intrafinity, your
Yeah.
first company.
Yeah.
What happened to Intrafinity? How did you build it?
We were kind of in downtown Toronto with a small team, and we built over 6 or 7 years 30 software products. So I don't know if it takes a lot of work to build software products. So you just imagine it was 9 to midnight, six days a week, We were with a small team coding these different products. But after 5 or 6 years, I realized something's wrong with this. I've built a lot of products, but I don't have a lot of customers. I only had a handful of customers on each. So we what I realized was I'm good at building products, but not good at building companies.
Mm.
And so we realized, okay, we need to shift. So we moved into this mode where we would start to spin out companies. We took some of that technology and set up a standalone company. And from that, we launched 5 companies. 2 of them we shut down. 3 did well, and one in there did exceptionally well. And they were all kind of software for kind of boring industries. We did some in education, for government, for online learning for large companies. And so in that first 6 or 7 years, we were building a lot of products. In the next 6 or 7 years, we scaled these companies. And one that did quite well was in the education space. It was called SharpSchool. Today it's called PowerSchool, and School Messenger. And so we eventually got to over 10% of the US market, so 10,000 schools using it. And we're able to eventually sell that business. We tucked that business into this larger company, and I joined the leadership team, and we grew that to eventually 60,000 schools in the US, so 60% of the US schools. So it was always fun. You'd sit down with some parents that have their kids in public school, and it was 50%, 60% chance they were getting daily messages from this software that let them know what was going on with their kids at school. So that was really rewarding work. And so it was, we the sale process was interesting. We were approached by kind of two players. One of them called, and it was a very interesting call. I got a phone call, and this fellow said, and he was a general manager of this business. He said, "John, I hate competition." He's like, "How about we do this? How about I give you a lot of money, uh, and then I buy your company, and then I'll have less competition." And but I knew their kind of playbook. What they would do is they'd buy the company, fire 80% of the staff, and then move the customers off of our product onto theirs because we had competitive products. And so as I was like prayerfully considering that, I was like, I don't think that's the end of the story that I want. And so we had another competitor show up and say, "Hey, we don't have your products. It's complementary. We'll make this bigger company together. We'll keep your team. We'll grow it." And eventually I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to go with that deal." So it was a great experience. I mean, I had never sold a company before, but here we were selling. And then when I was in the larger firm, we were able to go and buy companies and roll them up and acquire them. And I had a team in 7 different offices, including San Francisco, Toronto, Costa Rica. We bought a company, and I was over in Hong Kong and in Zhuhai, China, where we had a team there. It was a really exciting experience as I got to grow. And many of my entrepreneurial friends said, okay, the moment after I sold it, they're like, "Oh, how you got to get out of there. You're going to be, you're not going to learn anything, and you got to go start your next thing." But I decided to stay 3 years. I kind of stayed in that company, and I just learned so much. I
Mm.
learned so many different things, including in some sense, how hard it is for large companies to innovate. We were in a smaller unit in a bigger company, and it was stifling, and I had to kind of defend against all the bureaucracy so my team could be innovative.
You you had to make a transition from a founder into a executive,
Yep.
much more. You have to look at maybe the bigger picture in a much more detailed way. Can you help me understand? Do you struggle during the transition?
As soon as I sold the company, I suddenly felt a little lost. Now, some people sell their company and the next day they leave the company, and that's a unique experience. But in this case, I was now an executive, one of kind of 3 people in the senior leadership team in this firm, but I felt this loss of identity. I was like, "Oh, I'm an entrepreneur." I realized that was an identity I had put on, and suddenly I was now senior executive in this firm, and there was some sense of loss. Like it's like I didn't know who I was anymore. Um, but in terms of the skill set, Yeah, there's a lot to learn, and founders, especially when you're acquired, actually can play a really unique role because everyone in a firm, and this is generally the structure of employment, wants to keep their job. So kind of the rule number one of being an employee is like try to keep your job, right? But what that means is you're less disagreeable. You might not bring up innovative ideas because it's a little too risky. And so being kind of a founder in these larger firms, you actually can kind of have a strong voice and people kind of know that, oh yeah, like you don't care if you get fired. You're going to say the right thing and you're going to call it the way you see it. So you don't have to be as political, but um, yeah, so it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I grew a lot through it. Yeah. So eventually the time came where I finished my earnout. So earnout is like you sold the company and they keep you there for a certain period of time and then the golden handcuffs fall off and you can sail off into the sunset. And that moment when you're the first day you're done is a really precious time in the kind of development of these transition times are really important. But I had a friend who had a company for 25 years, and I met him on a Friday, which was the last day of he was working at that firm. So I met him, and I said to him, "So, are you gonna take time off, kinda reflect on what you wanna do in the next chapter, maybe take a year off, a sabbatical?" And he looked at me, he said, "Are you crazy? I already started my next company. I'm starting on Monday." And I remember in that moment, I was like, "Whatever he's doing, I am not gonna do it. I'm gonna take a sabbatical, I'm gonna take a year off, and try to figure out what I wanna do." And when I go talk to that friend now, this is a number of years ago, he regrets it. He says, "I should have taken the time off to reflect." He rushed into the next thing. So I spent a year in transition in this sabbatical, and I had a couple questions. I was, like, 37 years old, did really well financially, had a lot of optionality, but I loved working. Actually, I love working so much, I didn't know how not to work. So the first day I was free from the company, I woke up in the morning in my home. I'm married, and I went down to the main floor, and my wife saw me and she said, "What are you gonna do today now that you're free?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to my home office to work." And she said, "John, you don't have a job anymore. What are you what are you going to work for?" And I was like, I gotta do I need to go find out what my work is." So, and she was just like, "John, like something's wrong that you can't stop." So there was a set of skills during that sabbatical that I started to develop around reflection. And I really do believe now that like we grow at our pace of reflection. So you can be busy, you can do a lot, but you need to have a practice to reflect and retool and and see what you can learn and how you can redirect and even introspect your own desires and wants. And so that was one of the things that I started to explore in that
Mm.
sabbatical.
I thought it'd be useful to kind of go back in time to understand the meta culture that was driving Silicon Valley American corporate culture.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the maybe challenges that we see today are usually a byproduct of what happened maybe years ago, or they're artifacts of the past. So, for example, like if you look at Silicon Valley, it's a place that drives extreme innovation,
Yeah.
but also celebrates a certain form of extreme overwork. It
Mhm.
celebrates a lot of grind your teeth,
Yeah.
like, and what you said, just forever. You just keep working forever, right?
That's right.
Help me understand back then, what was the culture like in terms of be it the startup culture or corporate culture, its attitude towards work?
It's similar today, but there definitely is this push, work harder. I remember I used to say things like, "I'll sleep when I'm dead." We just got to keep going. Sleeping's a waste of time. I gotta keep at it, and in a sense, early startup building really does require such an immense amount of work. I mean, it was 9 a.m. to midnight, 6.5 days a week. I remember sleeping at this chair, maybe kind of like the chair we're sitting on now, many nights. You might wonder how I slept on the chair, but it would be I put my legs over one side and my head on the back and and fall asleep. And so there was a sense where it seemed the business really required that level of work, or at least that's what I told myself.
Mm,
And I think there was something that because of that like focus, we were able to kind of get through it. But at the time, I didn't have skills around how to partner with people. So I was kind of a solo founder doing it all on my own, and I hadn't yet built the emotional skills to kind of have deep partnerships. But yeah, in terms of the context, there was absolutely this push to just work, work, work. You never stop working, and I think you see very high incidence of depression, even suicide among entrepreneurial founders even today. So this culture kind of persists. And there is a sense, especially in Silicon Valley, of um, this Superman, Superwoman type culture where founders are almost semi-gods or demigods. You know what I mean? Like whether they they have these like special gifts and abilities, which they do, but the expectation that they're superheroes and can carry the world on their shoulders is too much. It's beyond what humans can really bear. So I think a way to work on that is to explore like how can you co-create with other people.
mm.
And I've written a few different articles on like on co-creation and like what are the skills you need to kind of partner and co-create and how do you develop those?
When you were taking a sabbatical and you kind of were alluding to the fact that you were struggling to not work, what was that journey like of mm, trying to understand yourself, where you can fit in the work that you do and one thing what to do? Because for me as a Singaporean, sometimes I read about founders who exited their business. A lot of them complain, "Oh, there's a void." There's this famous essay that I think the co-founder of Loom, after selling the business for close to $1 billion, says he doesn't know what to do with his life.
Yeah.
How do you kind of face the monster of or stare into the abyss, if as Nietzsche would put it?
And that abyss is so fearful that many people, and not just founders, but many people will spend their whole life avoiding that abyss.
Hmm.
And just working harder or letting some of these other things kind of take over them. So I started to do a couple things. So one, I started a number of like practices that were new to me. A lot of people may talk about them today, but I started I set a schedule for the morning. And I was like, I want to do these different things. So every day I had a time to kind of meditate and pray every morning. And I had a time to journal to kind of process what was going on. And it was in that time I also developed a practice where I would monthly take a day to be away, just to find a retreat center. Often there were different places I found. In Toronto, I found an Anglican convent. So there's a bunch of I thought nuns were only Catholic, but there's an Anglican convent with a bunch of many a group of nuns that were there, and they had a ward where people could come for a day. You could rent a room. It's almost like a hotel room. It was like $30 or something like that, and you could kind of sit there and be silent. And so those became really precious times for me because I'd bring some different books. I'd kind of work in silence. Another piece that was a precursor to this sabbatical was a couple years before, I had a bit of a psychological breakdown. We had this moment where we were think of like running mobile apps, websites for, I think at that point we had 7,000 schools in the US. And these hackers started attacking with denial of service attacks and other things, our system. So there was a period of a week and we just couldn't stop it. We were trying so many different things, but a period of a week where our system was off and on every hour. And you could imagine an office with, I think at that time, maybe 100 employees. every phone is ringing with a customer that is furious that the system's down. What are you doing? We can't operate properly. And I was working 24/7 with my team trying to solve this. And these hackers actually ended up in one case taking down like a part of a big chunk of the Canadian telecom network.
Mm.
And uh, and I suddenly could not. The next day, I couldn't get out of bed. And my wife said, "John, I think you need to see a therapist." And because it had been a few days, I couldn't get out of bed. So I remember going to my first therapy session, and I said, "What's the point of all this? Is it just to make a lot of money and donate it?" And there was this sense where I had lost like all meaning and purpose in the work I was doing. And so that was and the experience, the psychological experience I had was as if someone had beat me up in an alley.
Mm.
So it's interesting, right? Like this is a company, it's separate from me. It's not me.
Mm.
But when it was being attacked, I felt like I got beaten up in an alley. And so I started to realize that my identity had fused with my business.
Mm.
And I've talked to many different founders. This isn't always the case. Many of them had other jobs, but in my case, it had fused. And I had to start to do work to kind of separate my identity so I could still be all in, but I had kind of a safer separation. So
Do you think that this problem has gotten worse or has gotten better nowadays?
I think a lot of investors, specifically select founders that have this psychological trait. So a lot of investors will say, I only invest in founders that have a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
Right. And I've always wondered, what does the chip on their shoulder mean? But when you start to peel it back, it's that this business they're starting will determine if they are a valuable person or not.
Mm.
So if the business fails, the founder will be worthless. And if the business succeeds, they will be really valuable as a person. And so you see it in different ways. People are, maybe, and it's somehow, so the question is like, how did that get in someone's psychology, right? But if you go back to, there's a lot of parents that are very like success oriented. I'll love you if you're successful. And if you're not successful, like my love's conditional. And so in our psyche, we can start to kind of attach our worth to the success of what we create. And in some sense that could be somewhat healthy, but often investors are looking for people where it's in an unhealthy degree because they know what is more powerful, that what's a more powerful motivator, that you are worthless. Like if you're going to be worthless if your business isn't successful.
Mm.
Like that, there's almost nothing more powerful for someone to kind of to go all in on it. And so this is something I've really struggled with. Like, do the top entrepreneurs or the successful entrepreneurs, how unhealthy psychologically do you have to be successful?
Mm.
And when you look at like the biographies of Elon Musk and some others, Walter Isaacson in that, for example, he leaves this question wide open. Did Elon have to have the level of trauma from his childhood with his father and other things like this? Like, is that what made him successful?
Mm.
And I guess I just don't accept that you have to go through like deep traumatic unhealed experiences to be successful in the world. And I think there's a better path forward.
Mm. Even as you recounted the story about you being hit by that denial of service attacks and you going through that panic attack. And now you've come out on the other side. And now you're seeing maybe a similar pattern repeat itself that's been kind of dominant in maybe American or Western startup culture.
Yeah.
Even in Singapore, actually, even in our part of the world, it's the same issue, right? We talk about the 996 and parts of Asia. It's about working from 9 to 9, 6 days a week. Is there a way to want well? How does one approach one thing well? in the work that they do. You don't need to be a startup founder, but you can be in a corporate job. You could be a volunteer. You could even be a startup founder.
That's right.
How do you want well in that case?
I have a friend. Um, he was he was he he was this in kind of North American language, say a cowboy, kind of wild. Spends a lot of time in Las Vegas, um, and a very successful executive and business builder. And later, as he grew in his 50s, he got cancer, and he went through a kind of a process to treat the cancer. And he had been my boss in an internship I had done when I was like 18 years old, and I had kept lightly in touch with him, but I reconnected with him like 20 years later, after he had recovered from the cancer. And we had this really powerful experience or conversation where he said to me, "John, cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me." And I was floored. I'm like, "What are you talking about? How would cancer is terrible?" But he said, "John, I was going down a path that was self-destructive, and cancer was this kind of crucible experience that made me redirect." Uh, and so it's interesting because Jonathan, in that case, would reflect on it, and he would say, I wasn't wanting what my younger self was not wanting well, but now I'm wanting well." And there's this sense where we look back at our younger selves and we say, you know what, I didn't know what I was doing. I was running after all the wrong things. And so I think there's a journey to go through in life to figure out, like, how do you want well? So there's a number of layers to it, but maybe one to start with is around, I call it wanting from windows. I feel like in life, a lot of people are going to the department store window or the the Amazon cart, or whatever it would be, and they're looking in through that window, or social media, looking through that social media window, and just saying, "I want that." So, and there's some interesting research on this. There's a Stanford professor, he's passed away a few years ago now, named Rene Girard, and he's written a whole series of books. They're hard to read. They're fairly academic. But Luke Burgess has written a book called Wanting, that I think makes a more accessible version of his theory. But Rene Girard basically said that we as humans, and this is a shocking insight, and if it's true, it's like it could change like how we look at everything. But he says fundamentally as humans, we do not know how to value things. So um, we value things based on how other people value things. So if I have a friend I trust and he says, "Oh, this new restaurant's amazing," I'll go check out the restaurant and believe it's valuable. It'll even taste better when I'm at the restaurant because my friend, told me it was amazing. So René Girard argues that we have what he calls mimetic desire. We don't have true desire ourselves. Mimetic means we copy. We copy the desires of others and adopt it as our own. And we don't know that that's happening. So it's a subconscious process. And you see a lot of this, bubbles in financial markets. Why are there bubbles? Well, it's because there's momentum. Why is there momentum? Well, a lot of times it's because everybody's going for it. Meme stocks, right? These are things where other people said it's valuable, even though everyone knows there's no value to it. but you're going for it. So there's this. So Rene Girard had this observation that we don't know actually how to value things, like, which is such a shocking idea. And so if that's true, okay, and so you value things through these models or these heroes or these people you respect. And if he's right, and I believe he is, what that means is the most important thing you can do is choose the right heroes.
Mm.
And Warren Buffett has a line, and I won't quote him perfectly here, but he said, if you want to live life well, not just not making money. He's like, I'm not talking about making money. I'm talking about living a good life. If you can pick the right heroes, that's half the battle. And I think that's consistent with René Girard's view that our wants are determined by who our heroes are. And so I think the first thing to realize is a lot of the as we grow, our heroes evolve and change. And I think we need to be really deliberate around who are the heroes that I'm looking at to triangulate, what's valuable in life. And just to give an example, this is a decade ago, and I know, like with Tesla, it's maybe in the U.S. right now it's very political, but at the time it wasn't. And I was in Canada at a conference with a bunch of other entrepreneurial friends, and one of the guys showed up and he said, "I got the second Tesla in Canada." And he was all excited, and he drove it to the conference, and everybody, there were about 10 of us, and we all got around the car and we're saying ooh and ah, and we're drooling of like, oh, we wish we had one of these. And but I was sitting there and I was like, what is happening right now?
Yeah.
Because I had other friends that were like, those early Teslas were terrible. They were falling apart all the time. They didn't work properly. You had to take them back to get repaired. But there was one of our friends who we all trusted, and he was telling us this is the most amazing car ever, and we all adopted that perspective of valuing. So I think that's one of the first steps. Um, a second step, I would say, is much harder. And this is that a lot of our wants are come out of our wounds. And what I mean by that is, um, okay, I'll give an example. So I was with a friend. He had sold his business for hundreds of millions of dollars, and he had finished about 3 months before he finished with the business, and he had a quick exit. So like he sold it, and then like right after that, they he wrapped up pretty quickly. And he was trying to process this challenge of, he's on the other side of success, and he felt really lost and confused around this next stage. And in this moment of reflection, he said to me, "John, I when I was a kid, my parents fought about money all the time. We didn't have enough money. My mom and dad were fighting all the time." And so you can imagine him, right, in like, middle school or something, and his parents fighting about money. And he's like, I resolved when I was really young that I never wanted to fight about money in my whole life. And then he said to me, "John, I think I just spent the last 15 years of my life trying to solve that problem.
Mm.
And so, but I need something better to live for now."
Mm.
And so what I see in that story is there was this kind of now he has a different problem. He has too much money problems. Before he had shortage of money problems. Now he has too much money problems. But there was a wound there. He was there was some wound from his childhood, and he spent 15 years of his life trying to solve that wound. That ended up looking like a company that made him fabulously rich, financially rich. But there's a sense in that we want from these wounds. And so he spent 15 years, and he only figured that out
Mm.
after he sold the company.
Yeah.
He didn't know that there was that subconscious layer operating for 15 years. He was blind to it. But then as he had the time to reflect after he finished, he said, "I think that's what the last 15 years was about." And in my own journey, there's something similar where um, I was the oldest of 6 children.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of kids. My mother was a homemaker. My father was in finance in a CFO role in a distribution business. And uh, the family was crazy and busy, like you could just imagine. That's a lot of people. And you don't, we did not have hired help like you'd be able to have here in Singapore. So, I remember this moment where I think my dad was exhausted from work and whatever problems we created, so many kids. And I was at the dinner table, and I was trying to engage him in conversation, and it was a little hard. Like he wasn't talking that much. And then I remember I asked him a question about his work, the business he was working in, and he lit up and he started sharing all these like about what was going on, and just something a little light bulb subconsciously went off. Oh, okay. If I talk about some of the work stuff, I can really get my dad's attention.
Mm.
And I didn't know it at the time, but that thought rooted deep inside my subconscious tier. And it was only, I think it was about 15 years later, I was in Canada, in Ottawa, at a national dinner to celebrate an young entrepreneur of the year award. And we were at a table there, so it's a large convention center, a lot of tables. It's this award ceremony. We weren't sure who was going to win these different awards. And my dad was there next to me. We had one of the kind of ministers of innovation for the country on my other side. And all of a sudden they said, okay, winner, Young Entrepreneur of the Year award goes to John Carbrey. And then I was like, whoa. So I had to go give a speech. So I went up and didn't really know what to say because I think that was the first award I ever got. But and then eventually came and sat down. And I remember my dad was like, "Good job, son. You did a good job." And there was some sense where I had spent 15 years trying to get my father's affirmation, building that company and getting to that kind of national award level. And so there's this sense in which we want from our wounds. I had this wound of wanting more of my father's time, um, and I did a lot to do it. So this is really challenging stuff. It's like how do you get in the surgery table and start to work on these wounds? And so one suggestion I would give is there's a really great book called the Grief Recovery Handbook. It's from two psychologists, and they run a grief or loss recovery handbook, and they run a center to help people process different losses. And I had one of the most beautiful experiences of my life related to this book because someone that had been a mentor to me for many years, he was about 20 years older than me when I was late 30s. Um, he came to me and he said, "John, I know your mother passed away recently." And in his case, his wife had just passed away. And he said, this grief recovery handbook, it has this 6-week or 6 step process to take this loss, like take a loss, like loss of your spouse. And there's many other kinds of losses, loss of a job, loss of, um, there's obviously traumatic things that can happen, loss of your safety or, um, there can be so many different losses we experience, loss of, relationship, loss of trust in relationships. And he said to me, "Could you go through this book with me and together? Because the book is set up where you pair up with someone, and could we work on our losses?" And at first I didn't know what he was talking about, but that book had this process where you would list out all the losses you experienced in your life. So that was one of the weeks. So the first week was no one knows how to process loss. And we just carry these losses around with us our whole life. So a loss I experienced when I was, 10 years old, I'm carrying around, let's say at 40, at 50. The losses don't go away. We carry them with us. And so this book argued that there has to be a process to heal, or they use the language complete losses. And so there's this kind of journey we went on to realize we don't know how to process loss. We don't know how to complete losses. And it was interesting. They said, list all the losses you've experienced in your life. So I listed out 40 losses. I still have it on my iPad, actually. But it was so interesting as I listed them out, a bunch of them, no emotional reaction when I thought of it. But there were about 5 of the 40 where I felt this emotional reaction. And so started to realize, these are losses I'm carrying with me. And that book, and there's many other ways to work through it, gave us a path to kind of process the loss. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that, yes, so we want from Windows, we want from this department store of things we're looking at from our friends who need to pick good heroes, but we also carry these losses and we need to kind of work to heal them. Otherwise, we might spend 15, 20 years of our life just trying to heal these losses. So,
Well, I was hearing you talk about Rene Girard, and I can't help but recall what Peter Thiel talks about, exploiting mimetic desires to build companies with strong network effects. And it seems inevitable to me that as you have that philosophy as kind of an operating philosophy for your company, you eventually will want to strive to be a monopoly, like what Peter Thiel suggests, that every startup should strive to be a monopoly. But with monopolies, you kind of create a lot of negative externalities, a lot of market failures. When entrepreneurs start their business, they don't really think about negative externalities. They don't think about the ecosystem around us. So it's only about what we want.
one of the stages of wanting well is what I would call wanting from wovenness. And I'm just kind of finishing up this article on this, but essentially, wanting well does involve a very individual process. We need to tune our wants. We need to work through these wounds and these losses so we can kind of not be kind of have distorted desire. But ultimately, we need to be in community to do something amazing in the world, right? And so I think there's kind of like this two-dimensional layer to it, where one is we want to be in high trust relationship. I think there's cultures there's different cultures that are very transactional, and I want to be in transformational relationships. I don't want transactional relationships. Transactions have their place. I want to do Grab or Uber, and it'll be a quick transaction to get from here to there. But for the kind of the meat of my life, I want transformational relationships. And so there's kind of this journey to kind of like, how can we build and foster trust? And then there's another dimension, which is, can we have like a creative moral imagination of how the world could be a better place? And so there's a lot of groups that maybe involve creating trust. You can be at, I don't know, a country club, or, and you go and you have meals together and there's trust building. But there's not as many groups that will have trust and have a group of people with a creative moral imagination of what they could do in the world. And ultimately, I think the kind of highest level of wanting we can have is when we can merge with other people and kind of want together something, uh, have this imagination of this is the new world we want to create. And so I think that brings us to business itself and like creating businesses and on entrepreneurship as a vehicle to do that. And I think so. What is a business? Is a business just an entity that creates money? Money is a byproduct of or profit is a byproduct of what the business does. There has to be some purpose for the business, some challenges it's solving, something new in the world that it's creating. And so I think the entrepreneurial process is so amazing for that, because we get to, imagine you're an executive and you get hired into a cigarette company. You're kind of like, you're just like, shoot, this, so what do? You say, I want to, can I be transferred to the reduced harm division, to the vaping division, because it's not as bad as the cigarette division, right? You kind of have the DNA baked of that business. You
Yeah.
can't do that much. You can't imagine a very different world. But when you're kind of in this entrepreneurial journey, starting from scratch, you get to craft the DNA of what you create. And so I think the way I'd articulate it is that the purpose of business is to solve these problems, or kind of bring from the future to the present this kind of new reality of people and the planet. And so sort of to profitably solve these problems, right? And so So with that in mind, then we're out searching for like how can we solve an amazing problem? How can we bring the future to the present? And that's such an amazing journey to go on. And we get the opportunity as our businesses grow to do it with co-founders of ours and other people as well. And so that's kind of an absolute privilege.
You're almost doing something that's very contrarian to what maybe most typical venture studios or venture investors are doing, which is one, you're trying to create a business with a richer moral imagination, like what you said. Then the second part is about finding well-adjusted founders, which is almost not what people look for in the kind of companies they're looking to find, because they're ultimately, for the most part, they're looking for the highest return on investment. So by definition, and maybe if I allude to some of your earlier points, that you usually look for the most obsessive founder
Mm,
that really ties themselves to the ship, right? And with regards to the moral imagination, it's a good to have, it's a luxury, but not necessarily a necessity.
mm.
Then in that case, I'd like to ask you, what do you think would make a good ideal founder in the partners that you work with? What makes a good founder in building that kind of brighter future?
My role as a managing partner at FutureSight, we are a venture studio, or another way to say that is a team co-founder. We get about 1,000 founders a month that apply to us and say, "I'd like you to be my co-founder in the next thing that we build." And generally, we're picking about one person every 1 or 2 months to say, "Okay, we'll co-create our next thing with them." And then we have our whole team kind of wrap around this kind of individual or two individuals and do everything we can to kind of maximize the success of this venture we create. It's all in this kind of AI space around how can we take reasoning and with the cost dropping, do something brand new, typically in a very vertical industry. So if there's founders that have built companies before and have unique expertise in certain verticals, we're really excited to kind of explore what we would do with them. And the whole process is about a year and a half to 2 years. We kind of start at an ideation stage, trying to find the best opportunity. We then go into a validation stage where we try to test many different versions of the idea to kind of make sure we have the highest breakout opportunity that we go after. And then we go and form the company, build the product, get the initial customers, and ultimately we invest ourselves into the business, and then through our network go through a kind of a fundraising process to bring a lot more capital into those businesses to make them successful. So I think one thing that's interesting, and there's some good research on this, although it's thorough research, but it's not broadly studied, is what I would call return on character.
Mm.
So what's the return on investment in someone's character? And there's some very interesting studies that highlight actually leaders with higher levels of character, and there's many different attributes you can break that down into, have much higher returns. Um, so, and there's some good research that's been done in the public markets on this. So I think, that character and different attributes around that is one thing that does produce higher returns. The other is, in terms of strapping yourself to the mast. I think you can do that in a healthy way and an unhealthy way.
Mm.
So you can strap yourself to the mast out of a wound, or I know other people that are mimetically doing that. And I did that as well. I was strapping myself to the mast of my business, the wound, wanting the affirmation of of my father was there as like a primary motivator. But if you can connect to deeply to the purpose of what you're doing, of the business that you're creating, that is a beautifully positive thing that can also have you strap yourself to the mast. And another term for strapping yourself to the mast would be having skin in the game. And to me, skin in the game is the most one of the most positive moral traits. Actually, if you think of the financial markets generally, there's a lot of managers. These are investment managers. They take in investment capital and then they manage it. And there's a standard fee structure for that. They take a certain 2 and 20, let's say. They take 2% a year of the fees and they get 20% of the upside. My question is, how much downside do they have?
Mm.
And if you think of that structure, well, if you lose a lot of the money, there's no downside. You might have to get a new job, but go to another place. They're not losing their own money. And so, in a sense, the financial services industry has designed this system where you can get upside, but no downside. Now, a lot of people would be like, that's amazing. But fundamentally, I think the most moral kind of force is where we have skin in the game. We get upside and we take downside in whatever we're doing. So that's kind of a very powerful thing that I think is a good thing. Now, your motivation could be out of wounds, but it can also be out of purpose. And if you can kind of latch onto as a founder this like beautiful purpose that your business is fulfilling, that can be really meaningful work. And I believe more sustaining long term to strap yourself to the mast.
Have there been like founders that you've backed or supported that you think kind of live up, or maybe they kind of exemplify the kind of virtues that you've espoused so far?
There's a business we've been working on in the construction technology space, and there's a really amazing founder, Calvin, that's working on that business. And I remember when we started to dig in the construction technology industry together, we realized, at least and this is in North America, I don't know about other markets, but we realized that there was suddenly this new problem. In the past, construction firms really just wanted to get all the sales contracts and then they would deliver. But there started to not be not enough construction workers in North America. They were getting older and older. They were retiring. And suddenly everything changed. The job of construction firms was actually to retain these workers in the field, right? So what we discovered as we dug into it, we talked to people in the head office and they'd say, we just lost another foreman. And we have more contracts than we can handle. We don't have the staff to deliver it. And then we go talk to the workers and they would say, this company doesn't value me or appreciate me. If I get paid 25 cents more, I'm out of here. And so there was this gap where the leaders needed their workers and wanted them to stay. And then the workers were completely kind of disenfranchised. And so I think that was a very interesting space, and Calvin had worked in the construction industry before, and he knew that viscerally, that gap. And so we were able to kind of build a system that when it goes into construction firms, when CrewScope goes into construction firms, we get 15% labor productivity improvement. And just, like margins on these projects is often like 4 or 5%, 50% of the cost is labor. So you're doubling the profitability of these projects when you put this system in. And this system, I won't go into the details, but fundamentally solved that gap where there was better alignment between the folks in the office and the workers in the field. And so that was a really amazing journey that we're still on together, where we were able to identify this gap where workers needed to kind of be more just led better
Yeah.
and more aligned with the outcomes. And when we did that, we got like this beautiful outcome that would come out of it in terms of everyone's like so much happier.
To zoom out a little bit, I've interviewed a lot of VCs, so they all have different theses, right? You seem to have a very high premium on the character of the founders that you work with. And you seem to have a belief in this creative and moral reimagination of a world where your business can positively improve not just the businesses or clients you work with, but the greater ecosystem around it. Then the question I have for you is, then what do you look at? What are the kind of filters or criteria you look at in terms of be it project selection or the startups that you choose to help or support?
So I would say this vision of this like creative moral imagination is something that is kind of like a frame on my whole life. And there's many areas of my life where I'm partnering, not just the work in FutureSight building companies, but in other areas, in nonprofit areas, in impact investing areas that I'm involved with on behalf of my family. And uh, this desire to be at that level of wovenness where I'm in high trust relationships with some creative kind of moral imagination. So when I take this down to kind of like business building, it goes practically down to like we're building AI focused software businesses, and I'm very open tented on what's like a better world. If we make something more efficient, that's a small movement towards like a better world. So don't get me wrong in terms of like everything has to be world peace only, or or solving climate change is like the only thing that's valuable. Not at all. I think like if we're creating value, even if it's the smallest thing, you're helping someone be better, more compliant with someone or another business, or helping people get into better universities that are better fit for them, or helping something in the doctor's office, or we're building a company on like how to better assess elderly people for dementia so they can get care earlier. Or there's so many small things where you can have like a positive impact. Actually, if someone's going to pay you for something, as long as you're not, I don't know, not a drug dealer, like generally you're getting paid for something that can have like a, something positive. So I think I just have frames my life. Like I want to be in that space, but specifically in terms of FutureSight, what we see is this unique opportunity around AI. And what we're doing is partnering with repeat entrepreneurs that want to build their next thing. And they're going through a process of trying to pick who their co-founder is. And so they can look around the room. Oh, I know people I've worked with before. But there's also this new opportunity to say, I want to co-found this business with FutureSight, with a venture studio in that model. And it's an interesting comparison because you can have an individual, but in the FutureSight context, you can get a whole cross-functional team with a lot of different capability that we can bring to the table day one. And so what we see is when founders kind of look at that comparison, they say, yeah, I want to work with FutureSight in terms of like all these capabilities they're going to be brought to maximize the success of what we're doing. And so what I'm most excited about right now is this interesting space where the cost of reasoning is going towards zero. And what does the world look like when you have like unlimited reasoning ability? And I think a lot of us, especially in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure we've been chatting about this a little bit too. We're just trying to imagine like, what's that new world look like? And some of the things are easy to see. You'd say, oh, well, there are certain roles today that, okay, if we just replace them with AI. But there's also cases where if you had 100 times more reasoning ability for the same cost, like you might do entirely new things. And that's a really exciting world. I'll give you an example. So we're building a company called Addy. It's with a founder Andrew out of San Diego. And what Andrew realized is the wealthy 1% in the US and globally have the ability to hire what's called college admissions coaches,
Yeah.
or advisors. And these college admissions coaches can be really expensive. Like sometimes families are paying $20,000 a year, for a number of years, often 4 years in high school, to have their kids coached to get into the best or better schools. And as he looked at that, he just said, "Oh, this is like a really unfair financial advantage." And he was like, "I want to." But it's a professional services business, right? There's the college advisor, and they're charging hundreds of dollars an hour, and there's just not enough of them. But what if we could, using AI, create 100 times more of these college advisors. And that's exactly, what we're doing. And that means that like the whole middle class could have an opportunity to have access to this level of coaching that wasn't available before. So maybe the next 50% of the population. And so that's like a different world. It could be a really exciting place.
My last question for you is, if you had one piece of advice to give to a fresh graduate entering the workforce, what would it be?
Be excellent at what you do. And then the sky's the limit.
Well, with that, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you are watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications for whenever new episodes are out. If you're on Spotify or Apple, it would help us greatly if you could leave a 5-star review on those platforms. Once again, thank you for tuning in to the Front Row Podcast.